The lesson lasted exactly 0.19 seconds, but the silence that followed stretched for nearly 5 minutes. Rick Nelson, Hollywood's fastest-drawing teen idol, and the cocky 21-year-old who had built his reputation on being quicker than men twice his age, stood frozen in the recording studio at Capitol Records, staring at his hand as if it had betrayed him. Across from him, Sammy Davis Jr., at 36 years old, calmly holstered his weapon with the unhurried precision of a master craftsman who had just given a physics lesson to an overconfident student. What had just happened wasn't simply a contest of speed. It was a demonstration that in the world of true mastery, youth and confidence meant nothing compared to experience and wisdom. The kid who thought he was ready to challenge the established order had just learned that there are levels to greatness that take decades to achieve, and that the difference between being fast and being impossibly fast was measured not in fractions of seconds, but in the depth of one's dedication to perfection. This is the untold story of the day when Hollywood's rising star discovered that natural talent without seasoned wisdom is just potential waiting to be humbled. Summer 1961 was Rick Nelson's moment. At 21 years old, he was one of the hottest young stars in Hollywood, with hit records climbing the charts and teenage girls screaming his name at concerts across America. But beyond his success as a singer and heartthrob, Nelson had developed a reputation for something unexpected. He was genuinely, measurably fast with a gun. Growing up as the son of radio and television stars Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, Rick had been surrounded by entertainment industry professionals his entire life. But unlike most teen idols who focused exclusively on music and acting, Nelson had developed a serious interest in Western skills, particularly quick-draw gunfighting. He had trained with some of the best instructors in Hollywood, practiced obsessively between recording sessions, and had achieved draw times that impressed even veteran Western actors. At 0.4 seconds, Nelson was faster than most men twice his age, and he had the confidence that came from never having been seriously challenged by anyone in his peer group. More importantly, Nelson represented the new generation of Hollywood performers, young, ambitious, and convinced that they could do everything bigger and better than the established stars who had come before them. In his mind, older performers like Sammy Davis Jr. were relics of a previous era, impressive for their time but inevitably destined to be surpassed by younger, more naturally gifted successors, which is why he was so eager for the confrontation that took place on August 17, 1961, at the Capitol Records building in Hollywood. The meeting wasn't planned as a showdown. Both Nelson and Sammy were at the studio for separate recording sessions, but word had spread through the building that two of Hollywood's reputedly fastest guns were in the same place at the same time. Studio executives, musicians, and technical staff began gathering in Studio A to witness what promised to be either a friendly demonstration or a legendary confrontation. Nelson arrived first, carrying his custom-made gun belt and radiating the kind of youthful confidence that came from a career built on breaking rules and exceeding expectations. At 21, he moved with the easy swagger of someone who had never encountered a challenge he couldn't overcome through natural talent and determination. Sammy arrived 20 minutes later, carrying himself with the quiet dignity that characterized his approach to every professional situation. At 36, he had spent 2 decades perfecting his craft, and his presence in any room carried the weight of someone who had earned his reputation through countless hours of dedicated practice. The contrast between them was immediately apparent. Nelson was all energy and enthusiasm, eager to demonstrate his skills and prove his place among Hollywood's elite performers. Sammy was calm and observant, studying Nelson with the interest of someone who had seen many young talents and understood the difference between promise and achievement. "Mr. Davis," Nelson said, extending his hand with the respectful manner he had been taught to use with established stars. "I've heard a lot about your quick-draw skills. They say you're one of the fastest in Hollywood." Sammy shook Nelson's hand warmly. "Rick Nelson, I've heard good things about your abilities too. Word is you've been making quite an impression with the Western crowd." The compliment was genuine, but Nelson detected something in Sammy's tone. Not condescension exactly, but the kind of patient amusement that adults showed when children claimed to be as good as grown-ups at adult activities. "Well," Nelson said, his competitive instincts beginning to engage. "I've been training pretty seriously. Modern techniques, scientific approach to speed development. I think the new generation brings some advantages that maybe weren't available to earlier performers." It was a polite way of saying that he believed his methods were superior to the old-fashioned approaches used by Sammy's generation. The implication was clear. Younger meant faster, newer meant better. Sammy's expression didn't change, but those who knew him well could see the slight shift in his posture that indicated Nelson had just crossed from friendly conversation into territory that required a response. "Newer techniques can be helpful," Sammy agreed diplomatically, "but I've always found that there's no substitute for experience when it comes to understanding what speed really means." Nelson's confidence was unshaken. "With respect, Mr. Davis, I think experience can sometimes become a limitation. When you've been doing something the same way for a long time, it's hard to adapt to improvements in technique and training methods." The challenge was implicit but unmistakable. Nelson was suggesting that Sammy's methods were outdated, that his reputation was based on past achievements rather than current capability, and that a younger performer with modern training could surpass whatever the older generation had accomplished. "Interesting theory," Sammy said quietly. "Would you like to test it?" The studio fell silent as the two performers faced each other in the center of the recording space. Word had spread through the Capitol Records building, and the audience now included not just the original gathering but executives from other floors who had come to witness the confrontation. Nelson took his position with the confident stance of someone who had never lost a quick-draw contest. His gun belt was positioned exactly where his instructors had taught him to place it, his stance was textbook perfect, and his hand hung at his side with the relaxed readiness of someone who had practiced the motion thousands of times. "Standard rules?" Nelson asked, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who had been waiting for this moment his entire career. "Standard rules." Sammy agreed, taking his own position with the unhurried precision that characterized all his movements. The contrast between their preparations was subtle but significant. Nelson's stance showed the mechanical perfection of someone who had learned proper technique and practiced it diligently. Sammy's stance showed the fluid adaptability of someone who had internalized technique so completely that it had become instinctive. One of the studio executives volunteered to call the draw, and the room fell into the kind of expectant silence that preceded either triumph or disaster. "Draw," came the command. What happened next became the stuff of legend in Hollywood recording studios and would be talked about for decades by everyone who witnessed it. Rick Nelson's draw was genuinely impressive. His hand moved to his weapon with practiced efficiency, his technique was flawless, and his speed was exactly what you would expect from someone who had trained seriously with professional instructors. In most contexts, against most opponents, it would have been more than fast enough to establish his reputation as a legitimate quick-draw artist. But Sammy Davis Jr. had already drawn, aimed, fired, and begun holstering his weapon before Nelson's gun was even halfway out of its holster. The speed wasn't just superior, it was from a different universe entirely. There had been no visible motion, no dramatic flourish, just the instantaneous transition from standby to action and back to standby while Nelson was still processing the command to draw. The studio fell into absolute silence. Nelson stood with his weapon partially drawn, staring at Sammy in complete disbelief. "Time!" called out someone who had been monitoring with a professional stopwatch. "Mr. Davis, 0.19 seconds!" The number hit Nelson like a physical blow. 0.19 seconds was beyond anything he had ever imagined possible. His own best time achieved under optimal conditions with perfect preparation was 0.4 seconds, and he had been proud of that achievement. But what Sammy had just demonstrated wasn't just faster, it was faster by a margin that suggested completely different levels of capability. "That's impossible," Nelson whispered, finally holstering his own weapon. "Nobody can draw that fast." "Want to see it again?" Sammy asked gently. The second demonstration was even more devastating, 0.18 seconds. The third was 0.17 seconds. Each time, Nelson's respectable speed looked glacial by comparison. Each time, his understanding of what was possible in quick draw was revised upward. After the fifth demonstration, Nelson set down his gun belt and looked at Sammy with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been shattered. "How?" was all he could manage. Sammy's explanation was delivered not with the triumph of a winner, but with the patience of a teacher who genuinely wanted his student to understand the lesson. "Rick, you've been thinking about this like a young man," Sammy began. "All energy and enthusiasm and modern techniques. But speed isn't just about youth or training methods. It's about understanding." He demonstrated his setup, showing how every element had been refined through years of experience rather than months of instruction. "You learned the right way to draw fast. I learned why drawing fast matters when it matters and how to do it consistently under any conditions." The explanation continued for several minutes, with Sammy revealing not just technical differences but fundamental philosophical approaches to mastery. "Your instructors taught you to draw 0.4 seconds, Sammy said, "and that's genuinely impressive, but they taught you a technique. What I'm doing isn't technique. It's instinct developed over 20 years of treating every practice session like my life depended on getting better." Nelson listened with the humility of someone who had just discovered that everything he thought he knew about his area of expertise was elementary compared to true mastery. "You said newer was better," Sammy continued. "But in this case, newer means you've had less time to develop the kind of muscle memory and mental preparation that real speed requires. You're fast for someone who's been training for a few years, but I've been training for 2 decades. The lesson went deeper than just technical instruction." Sammy was explaining the difference between talent and mastery, between learning techniques and developing artistry. "The thing about experience," Sammy said, "is that it teaches you things that can't be learned from instructors or books, like how to stay calm under pressure, how to eliminate mental static, how to draw not just fast, but fast when it really matters." Nelson was beginning to understand that what he had witnessed wasn't just superior training. It was the product of a completely different relationship with the skill itself. "You approach this like a competition," Sammy explained. "You want to be faster than other people. I approach this like survival. I want to be so fast that the question of competition never comes up." The philosophical difference was profound. Nelson had been trying to win contests. Sammy had been trying to achieve levels of capability that made contests irrelevant. "I get it now," Nelson said finally. "I was thinking about being fast. You're just fast. It's not a technique for you, it's who you are." The acknowledgement represented a complete reversal of Nelson's initial assumptions about age, experience, and the superiority of modern methods over traditional approaches. "So what do I do now?" Nelson asked. "How do I get from where I am to where you are?" Sammy's answer revealed both the hope and the challenge of achieving true mastery. "Time," Sammy said simply. "You've got good fundamentals and obvious natural talent, but what you've just seen takes years to develop. Not months or even a few years. Decades of dedicated practice with complete commitment to getting better every single day." He paused, studying Nelson's expression. "The question is whether you're willing to do that kind of work when you already know it's going to take 15 or 20 years to reach this level." Nelson was quiet for a long moment, processing not just the technical information but the deeper implications of what Sammy was telling him. "Will you teach me?" he asked finally. "Not just the techniques but the approach, the mindset that makes this possible?" The request represented a complete transformation from the cocky young challenger who had entered the studio confident in his superiority to a humble student who recognized genuine mastery when he encountered it. "I'd be honored," Sammy replied, "but you need to understand that what you're asking for isn't just gun training. It's a complete commitment to excellence that extends into every area of your life." They spent the next hour in Studio A, with Sammy beginning Nelson's education not just in advanced quick-draw techniques, but in the mental discipline and philosophical approach that made extraordinary speed possible. By the end of the session, Nelson had improved his time from 0.4 seconds to 0.36 seconds, a modest improvement that nevertheless came from applying completely different principles. "This is just the beginning," Sammy explained as they concluded the lesson. Real improvement will come from daily practice with complete focus on precision rather than just speed. The encounter between Rick Nelson and Sammy Davis Jr. was never reported in entertainment magazines or trade papers. Both men preferred to keep their moment of mutual learning private, but the experience had a profound impact on Nelson's subsequent approach not just to gunfighting but to his entire career. Nelson continued his music and acting career with a new appreciation for the difference between natural talent and developed mastery. Those who worked with him noticed a new level of dedication to his craft, a willingness to put in the kind of sustained effort that distinguished true professionals from performers who relied primarily on natural gifts. Sammy, for his part, gained something valuable as well: the satisfaction of passing on knowledge to someone who genuinely wanted to learn and was willing to abandon his preconceptions in favor of real education. Years later, when Rick Nelson was asked about the fastest draw he had ever witnessed, he would always give the same answer: Sammy Davis Jr., 0.17 seconds, Capitol Record Studio A. And he taught me that being young and fast isn't the same thing as being good. The lesson of that day went beyond quick draw records or entertainment industry competition. It was a reminder that mastery requires not just talent and training, but time and humility. That the new generation's advantages, energy, modern methods, fresh perspectives, could never substitute for the depth of understanding that came from decades of dedicated practice. Rick Nelson had walked into that studio as Hollywood's fastest young gun, confident that youth and modern techniques gave him advantages over the older generation. He walked away with a revolutionary understanding of what real mastery looked like and a healthy respect for the kind of dedication required to achieve it. The 0.19 seconds that had silenced the studio had accomplished something that no amount of instruction or criticism could. It had shown a talented young performer the difference between being impressive for his age and being genuinely extraordinary at any age. And in Hollywood, where youth and novelty were often prized above experience and wisdom, that lesson was worth more than any recording contract, any fan following, or any industry recognition. Because when a genuine master takes the time to teach you the difference between talent and mastery, you've received an education that can transform not just your skills, but your entire approach to excellence. The speed had been impossible, the lesson had been invaluable. And the respect had been earned not through victory, but through the willingness to teach someone who had the humility to learn,